You might be aware that Pokemon players and Yu-Gi-Oh players seem to beef with each other on Twitter every 6 months or so. One of the things I always see highlighted in these discussions is the fact that Pokemon is much cheaper to get into and play competitively. And I've played games like Magic in the past, and while I had a great time competing, it just got so freaking expensive. And I'd heard things similar about Yu-Gi-Oh too, about how that game was super expensive and impossible to play without taking a mortgage on your house. Well, imagine my surprise when I see this tweet pop up in my feed. $30? Now I was a bit skeptical at first, cause wasn't Yu-Gi-Oh supposed to be an expensive game too? I knew that starter decks existed, but didn't those all just suck compared to what real Yu-Gi-Oh is like at tournaments? But nope, I did some follow-up research after seeing this tweet, and apparently 2 out of the 3 decks in the legendary modern decks set were very tournament playable straight out of the box. And they could be easily upgraded to tier 1 versions just by adding a few extra pieces too? Interesting. So I thought about it and debated whether I should give the box a shot. Really just for kicks and giggles, because I figured my Pokemon friends would think it's funny. I play a couple games with my homie, laugh about how absurd Yu-Gi-Oh is, and then go back to my merry life, right? Well, I did just that. I went to my local Best Buy and bought a box. I posted a picture of me buying the deck on my Twitter, expecting maybe 4 or 5 of my Pokemon followers to laugh about it. I only had 200 followers. I'm not a major content creator or famous player or anything, so no one would really care about my experiences getting into Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Well, I guess people really did care about my experience of getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! So I decided I couldn't let the people down. I was going to start learning the game and taking it seriously. I downloaded Master Duel, watched some deck and combo guides, brushed up on how the chain works, and all that stuff. It was information overload, but I grinded my way through it all. I even managed to win a game on Master Duel after 5 or 6 attempts, and let me tell you, I haven't felt that proud of accomplishing anything in a game since when I got into Dark Souls back in 2016 and I beat some of the toughest bosses in that game. So after a few days of learning the game and talking to so many nice people on Twitter about it, I decided that I wanted to share my experience and what it's been like as a new Yu-Gi-Oh player in 2026. I also thought I'd share some of the similarities and differences between Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon that I've noticed, at least so far. Where do I even start? This game is so f***ing hard. The learning curve is insane. Wanna know how hard Pokemon is? I've taught people the complete rules of the game in under 10 minutes. Including some corner cases that aren't immediately obvious too, like damage versus damage counters placed by effects of attacks. They might have a couple of reminder questions when we play our first game, like maybe how many supporters you can play, or how many items you can play in a turn, or whether you can evolve on the first turn you play a Pokemon. But generally they'll understand the rules well enough to play in a tournament setting after just 1 or 2 practice games. Now Yu-Gi-Oh on the other hand, let's just say I wasn't expecting the chain to be so confusing. I played Magic the Gathering competitively in the past, so I'm familiar with the idea of playing cards on your opponent's turn, but Yu-Gi-Oh kicks it up a notch with how the chain works, and how priority gets passed between players. It took a while for me to wrap my head around the various spell speeds, and I know on more than one occasion I was angry at Master Duel for skipping a chance to let me activate a monster effect, only for me to realize later that it wasn't a quick effect so it couldn't be activated at all. This isn't even getting into more intricate stuff like monster abilities going on a different, entirely separate chain when they're summoned from a first chain. I still haven't quite wrapped my head around that yet. One thing that I've noticed is that out of the big 3 card games, that being Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon, Magic tends to play off the top of the deck a lot more, whereas Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon tend to have a lot more tutors. I picked up and played Magic decks before without knowing any of the cards in the deck, and I've been just fine, since you're usually limited to only playing the cards from your hand onto the board. You're not really searching your deck for cards every single turn. Tutors are fun, and I do like what Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon do with them, but in my experience, having to choose a card in your deck really puts pressure on you to pick the correct card every single time. Both games have a lot of tutors, but I think where they differ is how easy or obvious the correct card choice is when it comes to using a given tutor. For example, in Pokemon, if my board has a copy of Ralts on it, and I play an Ultra Ball, it's pretty obvious that I most likely want to get a Kirlia because Kirlia says right on the card to evolve Ralts into it. It gets more complicated with cards like Arven or Secret Box, which can get multiple cards. But in general, I found that the correct card to get based on the board in Pokemon is usually at least fairly obvious. Or at the very least, even if the card you grab isn't optimal, it would have to be pretty deliberate for you to grab a completely useless card. In other words, using deck search is a skill that even brand new players can learn quickly without having to spend 2 minutes thumbing through their deck and reading each of their cards to choose the right one every single time. But my experience playing Yu-Gi-Oh wasn't like this at all. The deck I decided to build on Master Duel was the Radiant Typhoon deck. And who knows, maybe it's just the deck I decided to start with, but this deck uses a ton of cards that can search out monsters that say Radiant Typhoon in their name. So when I would use a card like Radiant Typhoon Crocea, I would get like 8 different options thrown up on my screen. And since I'm new, it's not obvious which one is the best one to choose. I had to read every single card to remember what their effects even were. Was this one the monster that gets a level 4 Radiant Typhoon monster? Was this one the one that gets a spell or trap? Was this one the one that shuffles stuff on my opponent's board back into their deck? Then once I read the cards, I had to think how I wanted to play out the rest of my turn. Which Radiant Typhoon monster do I end up going for? I ended up using so much time just to wrap my head around the possibilities and then figure out what the best option even was. And it doesn't even stop there either. Once I'd get my engine pieces set up on the board, I had even more decisions to make when it came to which extra deck monster to pivot into. Do I summon Totem Bird here? Little Knight? IP Masquerena? Radiant Typhoon Varuroon? Greatfly? Wind the Wind Charmer? This stuff is probably really obvious to experienced players, but let me tell you, I literally timed out 80% of my matches when starting out because I had to spend so much time reading my cards to even try and figure out which one was the correct one to play. This sort of decision paralysis is where I stumbled the most this week when trying to learn how to actually play Yu-Gi-Oh! And also, as an aside, I also played the Mitsurugi deck in paper, and let me tell you, trying to decide what to grab was so much worse with this than when I played Radiant Typhoon on Master Duel, because at least on Master Duel it filters out the valid search targets for you, and it formats the effects to be a little bit more readable. Though that being said, on the topic of spending a ton of time reading my cards, I don't want to beat a dead horse, since I know this has already been memed about to death, but oh my god, Yu-Gi-Oh cards are a pain to read. This is probably the most wordy Pokemon card I can think of that sees any play right now. Its first ability is a play effect that gets up to 5 darkness energy from your deck and puts on your Pokemon that say Marnies on them. Then, it also has an attack that does 180 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon and 30 to one of the bench monsters. So it's not the simplest card out there, but because of how it separates out the ability and the attack, it's pretty easy for me to read. Now, let's compare this to a Yu-Gi-Oh card that stumped me for a while, Super Star Slayer Typhon. Again, I'm not going to harp on this too long because I know it's already been talked about to death, but like, couldn't the designers have at least put line breaks or bullet points or something to separate out these abilities? I know Master Duel does this, and I'm also aware that in Asia they number out the abilities on physical cards, but it still sucks playing them in paper in the US. The first deck I played was the Mitsurugi deck that came with the Legendary Modern Decks collection. And oh my god, this product wasn't made for brand new players at all, was it? To help you understand where I'm coming from, because this might sound ridiculous to you guys that I bought a structure deck like this to start with, let me tell you about how Pokemon does it. Pokemon has introductory decks called League Battle decks. These are generally ever so slightly simplified, yet tier 1 archetypes that are designed for new players to buy and get into competitive Pokemon with. In the Pokemon community, whenever a new player joins the scene, it's very common advice to just tell them, hey, go buy one of the League Battle decks, play it at a few tournaments, and then upgrade it whenever you feel ready. And this is very good advice, mind you. 3 of the latest of the decks are based around Dragapult, Gardevoir, and Charizard, which have all won major tournaments in the last year. So players will pick up the decks, get a feel for how the tier 1 archetype works at its core, and then upgrade it with more optimized tutors and tech cards and the like. It's overall a fantastic experience for new players, since the decks are pretty easy to play at a basic level. I know a ton of people who've gone this route and then become entrenched Pokemon players. Heck, this is how I got into Pokemon in the first place. I bought a Charizard League Battle deck back in late 2024, and then fell in love with the game soon after. So I was expecting something similar in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'll fully admit, maybe this one is on me. Maybe there is a product out there that really is both ready to play at tournaments and yet still easy for beginners to pick up the game and learn it with. But in my opinion, the Legendary Modern decks were absolutely not made for beginners. At least not for beginners who didn't want to be chucked straight into the deep end of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Pool. I absolutely could not pick up and play the deck. I had to ask so many questions to the poor guy I was playing with. I felt so bad for him. If I told a person who's never played a card game before to start with the Legendary Modern decks, 9 out of 10 times they would get so frustrated at the complexity and probably just bounce off of Yu-Gi-Oh! Entirely. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing the product itself. I think the Dex collection is a fantastic product and I'm still so happy I bought it. I think I'll most likely be upgrading the Mitsurugi deck if I move to a place that has a strong in-person Yu-Gi-Oh scene, but it absolutely was not a pick up and play experience for beginners. And unless there actually is a product that does this well that's also tournament viable, then I think it's a bit of a shame that there's no good equivalent to Pokemon's League Battle decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! I could make an entire video about Pokemon TCG Live, which is Pokemon's digital client. It's pretty notorious in the Pokemon community for being bare bones, buggy, and overall just kind of ugly to look at. But on the bright side, it is by far the most generous digital card game I've ever played, even more so than Legends of Runeterra if any of you guys played that. Rest in peace, Legends of Runeterra PvP. I've played Pokemon TCG Live off and on for about a year and a half, and I have so much digital currency that I can literally craft every single relevant deck in the format like 10 times over. I'm never going to run out of crafting materials. In fact, it's physically impossible to spend money in Pokemon TCG Live. This game exists to be a companion to paper cards, instead of a vehicle for Pokemon to make money off of. On the other hand, Master Duel seems to me like it's the complete opposite of Pokemon's digital client. It has pop-in animations for boss monsters when you summon them, it has cool sound effects, the cards look modern, the animations are sleek, and it's generally just a pretty enjoyable experience to play. But, and I might ruffle some feathers when I say this, but I do have to say it, the economy is just not nearly as good as the Pokemon TCG Live economy. Pokemon TCG Live gives you tons of starter decks completely for free, and many of these need very little dust to craft into tournament-winning versions. Yu-Gi-Oh! Seemed to shower me in gems really early on when creating my account, but once I used these gems to buy the selection packs I thought were the best, it got so much more stingy. It seems like they really want you to spend money on the game, and I've had to get used to the change from being spoiled by Pokemon to having to save up cards to dust in Master Duel. I still haven't even finished my Radiant Typhoon deck, since I'm missing some key staples I want to run like Called by the Grave and Moltarmi Fualos. Another thing that's annoyed me a bit, those League Battle decks I've been talking about previously, well in paper Pokemon TCG, whenever you buy anything physically, whether it be a pack or a precon, it always comes with a QR code you can scan in Pokemon TCG Live to get a digital version of. In other words, when you buy a League Battle deck online or at your local game store, you get a free copy to mess around with in PTCGL as well. I was disappointed when I learned that in Master Duel didn't have this feature at all. I was hoping to get Mitsurugi practice in Master Duel, since I thought the deck was really fun in paper, but alas, that wasn't really possible. So overall, after spending 1 week playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, what are my thoughts? Well, I think it's a great game. It definitely lives up to its reputation of being super difficult to learn, much more so than any other card game I've played. I think if they wanted to, Konami could simplify the effects of new cards to make it easier for people to get into the game, but I think reducing complexity would also cut down on some gameplay intricacies that I know I'd enjoy once I managed to wrap my head around them. I do think there are some improvements that could be made to the layout of the cards to help them be easier to read, but in my opinion, a lot of the complexity of reading cards is also just because of the way that Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are designed. And I do think that Master Duel gets a lot right in terms of how it feels to play, but I can confidently say that I hate how its economy is set up. So what's next for me? Well, I plan on playing this game even more. I really want to try going to some local tournaments, since I found that locals are the best way to improve at card games while making some new friends too. And who knows, eventually I might make it out to a YCS at some point. I've been to 4 Pokemon regionals, which are roughly the equivalent of YCSs, and they've all been a ton of fun. I'd be curious to see what the differences between Pokemon regionals and Yu-Gi-Oh! YCSs are. Anyways, thank you for watching. This is my first YouTube video I've ever made, and so let me know what your thoughts are. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed my content. I might make future videos, who knows. Until then, I will see you all later.